Welcome back to the Final Lap podcast. My name is Josh. I'm joined, as always, by Sam. We're back after the summer break. Sam, how was your pretty long month-long break, and how did you enjoy the race this weekend?
Yeah, it was great, but I'm excited to be back. Excited for the stretch run of the season. We've got a lot of fun action coming up. We still got a title fight, although it took a turn this weekend that we'll talk about, and a lot of exciting tracks as well coming up. I know we've got Monza this coming week, which is always one of our favorites. So very excited about that and the stretch run here.
Yeah, Monza should be pretty exciting this weekend, as it usually is. But first, we have to talk about what happened last weekend in the Netherlands in Zandvoort, where Oscar Piastri wins, extends his championship lead from 9 points to 34 points. It was probably the dream weekend for Piastri. So it was his first career Grand Slam, getting pole. Um, Fastest lap, leading all the laps, and then winning the race. It was just a perfect weekend from his perspective. And I'm sure the competitor really deep down wants to, battle it out on track till the end. But for his championship, hopes and dreams, I think this weekend couldn't have gone more perfect for him. With what happened to Lando as well, which we'll get to, but it was a great drive from Oscar as well.
Yeah, it was a fantastic drive from Oscar. I think even though a lot of the talk after the race is going to be about Lando's DNF, this was really a great performance and exactly what he needed, regardless, to keep Lando from gaining any momentum after the summer break. I know Lando had a few nice moments there going into summer break, and it was huge for Oscar to really stave him off and keep that momentum. So, yeah, I mean, like I said, it being a little bit bigger margin than we expected, and that's unfortunate. And we'll get to that in a bit. But uh, regardless, Oscar put in a heck of a weekend. First Grand Slam for McLaren in decades, I believe. So that's a heck of a performance. No matter how good the car is, how big the advantage is, still incredibly dominant and exactly what he needed at exactly the right time.
Yeah, I think regardless of the outcome, Lando wise, I do think that this was no matter what, it was going to be probably Oscars to win. He had survived a couple restarts because it was a little bit of a hectic race. I know there wasn't a lot of there was some rain. It wasn't super heavy, but there was some rain that he had to navigate around, not make any mistakes there. Navigates that fine. So he overcame a lot in that race that probably could have gone wrong. One of those safety cars could have came out at the wrong time. Ruined his race from that perspective. He could have made a mistake on one of those restarts. Ruined his race there, but he didn't really have any issues with that. So I do think you know regardless of him getting the maximum amount of points for something that wasn't in his control, I do think that it was a maximum drive for him. And really a maximum weekend. When you look at the practice sessions, it looked like Lando was going to be the quicker of the two guys. But Oscar shows up in qualifying. Granted, it was by 0.012 seconds, so there's really nothing in it between those two guys. And I think we saw that in the race as well. But um, just from a gap between the two drivers, I think it was pretty marginal. But Oscar, like always, the season seems to be on the right side of these things. Um, getting pole or leading after the first lap or whatever it is, the margins are tight, but he is always, on the slightly better end of those margins. So I do think it was um, a perfect weekend from that perspective for Oscar. I think it was. I don't want to say it was his best drive of the season because I think he's probably had some that might have required more out of him, but I think it was a great weekend nonetheless.
Yeah, and that's a great point that it is marginal, but really it's all about the margins. It's all about a tenth of a second here and there that's going to separate these two drivers. I mean, they've been back and forth, neck and neck all year, and right now it's Lando that's been on the receiving end so far, sometimes of things that are not of his own doing, like this weekend, and other times, a couple mistakes throughout the year. Oscar's just been more consistent on track, but also has, gotten, I don't want to say lucky, but has not gotten as unlucky as Lando has in some of these moments. And when you add that up, now Oscar's got uh, definitely, I wouldn't say a dominant or wouldn't say it's over, but a commanding lead, really, given how much is left and what the McLarens are doing on a week to week basis.
Yeah, I think it's going to be it's still possible for Lando. Um, it's going to be a tough uphill climb, and if we want to go to the Lando thing now, we can. Um, Lando is having a fairly solid weekend. Loses out on pole like we said by just really really thin margins. I think they said it might have been a distant toe from Hadjar in qualifying for Oscar just at the very end that had given him that advantage. Before that last corner, they were pretty equal. So like you said, it's really coming down to the margins. But Lando loses out there, and then he's driving an okay race. Probably not the best thing to lose out. Um, on your second place going into turn one there and getting behind Max. I know in the end it probably didn't matter, but if you wanted to have a good shot at putting the pressure on Oscar for the entirety of a race, I think staying at least behind or getting ahead is what you needed to do there into turn one. But like I said, I think that they were pretty equal on pace. But what happens there with the engine is pretty crushing for Lando, just because now the gap is just so wide. I mean, if you lose the race but you come second, um, that gap isn't great, but it's definitely a lot more doable here. I think you're either going to need Lando to dominate the rest of the way, or you're going to need something similar to happen to Oscar. Maybe a big grid penalty for an engine change, maybe um, just some random penalty that he gets over the weekend, or you're going to need uh, for Oscar to have a DNF like this, whether it's on track, a race incident or mechanical failure. Um, Not that he can't do it if that doesn't happen, but it's just going to be a lot more difficult. Like I said, championship not over in my book, but I think it got about 10 times harder for Lando um, after this weekend. And that stinks because, in a large part, that gap now is built up because of a reliability issue for one driver and not on the driver or the teams, making a mistake or doing something great. It's built on something that's out of the driver's control, which is a bit of a shame.
I'm pretty much the same boat as you on this. I mean, I can't say it's over, but it's certainly going to be really hard for Oscar to come or for Orlando to come back if Oscar finishes every race. Even if there's a situation like you mentioned with a changing parts penalty and Oscar has to start at the back, even all the way back at the field. I think that McLaren is so fast that he can make up some serious ground and still have a solid finish. So I think we're kind of at a point, where it's not something you want to root for, but you might need a DNF from Oscar to get back in this championship. It's basically is a 34 point deficit right now. That's if you're assuming 1-2s every race, that's about a 5 race gap. And I know that we still got a few sprint races left. Still got 3 coming up, but it's a real. It feels like a much deeper hole now, and it's really disappointing to potentially have a championship decided like this. Unfortunately, that's how it goes sometimes in racing. But you got to give a little bit of credit to Lando here as well. That very well could have ended his championship chances, and he knows that. But it seemed like he took it pretty well after the race. Was still chopping it up with Oscar and Max and everything in the interviews, and I seem to be in relatively good spirits. But it's real disappointing to, again, we're not saying it's over, but this is a massive swing in the championship, and if this is the deciding moment, that's just not how you want to see a championship decided between two drivers that we thought could really go down to the final race.
Yeah, it was a little depressing to see. We'll get to the other one later, but to see him, the shots of him just sitting in the dunes with his head between, his arms there, right after it happened. Like you said, he seemed to be better, a little bit later post race. But I think he kind of realized in that moment, it's going to be a pretty big uphill climb from here. Maybe that does have an opposite effect of it opens him up a little bit to go out and push and just say, okay, I can really risk things now because I have to at this point. Maybe it opens him up, mentally there. Um, it could be a help. It's definitely not going to be a help points wise. Obviously, it makes everything a lot tougher, but it could be a mental help where he's just willing to take a lot more risks and go for a lot more things. You said he's going to need to win 5 of the last 9 if it's assuming all 1-2s from here on out. Is that what the margin would be?
No, I mean he's like if you're 1-2 every race, it's a 7 point gap, and he's 34 back. So he's if you're thinking about it like American sports, he'd be like 5 games back basically at this point.
Okay. Yeah.
So he'd have to really it'd probably be more like 7-2
Yeah.
from here on out. I don't know if that's exact math. And like I said, sprint races play in, but that's kind of about what it would have to be, assuming no DNFs or random like Oscar finished ninth in Australia, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that is a pretty big hill to climb, I think, just with how Oscar's been this year. Um, but I mean, stranger things happen, and it's not all been um, ones and twos this year for McLaren. I know it might get more that way just because as we go farther on the season, other teams are looking to 2026, and um, that's probably going to be a lot more of their focus when they know this championship's over for all those guys. Um, but I think that there are going to be opportunities where you get a Ferrari or Max or one of the Mercedes to kind of split those guys up. I still think that those are opportunities. I mean, in the last race we saw um, Charles for the first half of that race before Ferrari just kind of ruined his race. He was, leading the McLarens and was actually doing it like on pure pace. So it's still not, out of the realm that there's guys that get in there and chop up, a 1-2 from here on out. Um, but yeah, it's just it's a real uphill climb now for Lando just from that, just the points deficit alone. He really needs something, out of the realm of like a normal kind of race weekend to happen for Oscar if you're Lando or Lando fan.
Yeah, and I mean that's certainly not impossible. We've seen it before, these random weekends where all of a sudden the team that's unbeatable all year, it just out of nowhere has a rough weekend. It's like in uh, Singapore a few years ago, Red Bull won every race all year, and then
Hmm.
neither of them finished better than fifth in Singapore, kind of
Yeah.
out of the blue, and Sainz won that race. You never know, something like that could happen. Um, for as predictable as F1 can seem sometimes, it really is still like any other sport. Anything can happen at any given moment. So, um, yeah, and I feel like it's been very easy throughout the season to kind of reevaluate after every race and
Hmm.
see one driver getting a little momentum and go, oh, it's over.
Yeah.
And it's still not. It's not over till it's over. But
Hmm.
at this point, this is like the most definitive lead I think either one of them have had in a long time. Just given the mountain you have to climb points, right?
Yeah, like you were saying with the reliability thing, or the not the reliability, the spread of the field rather, it just being so much closer, um, than you would expect, just given the fact that it's pretty, we come into every weekend expecting McLaren to be 1-2, and like you said, it's pretty predictable, but I do think that there is a lot more field spread there than what we you have given credit for. Um, Granted, and that's one thing I think that this regulation has actually done fairly well, has been it's weird because I know we've had some of the most dominant seasons. We had Max in these regulations. We've had the McLarens, this year where some guys are just way out ahead of the rest, but it seems like the rest of the field has been very, very close throughout all of that. Um, one team or one guy getting it right, the other 9 teams or 19 drivers have all been, I feel like, pretty close in that aspect. In these regulations, I was thinking about that with what we're going to talk about next. After the Hadjar podium, like we've had Hadjar on a podium this year, we've had Hulkenberg on a podium this year, in a Sauber. I mean, we've had some really like strong performances from guys who are in teams and cars that aren't, that great. Um, so I will give the regulations that, and it's like qualifying is always so close between 3 and 10. It's like usually within 3/4 or half a second between those guys. So it's really fine margins, but it's like the top tier. I feel like separates way beyond in these regulations, but everything else has been close, which has been kind of odd to watch.
Yeah, I really think if we weren't getting such McLaren dominance at the top, this would
Mhm.
go down as one of the best seasons in a long time.
Yeah.
And we've seen a lot of people say that the field is much closer than it has been in years. We've seen, yeah, like you mentioned this weekend, Racing Bull finishing ahead of Ferrari and Mercedes, um, just on pure pace, and we've seen that in other races too. We seen a Sauber on the podium, and um, seen Williams have their best season in a long time. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's the good news is I think for F1 fans is at least we're getting two new drivers and a new team, not new in the history of F1, but in recent history. Just getting someone different up there at the top of the leaderboard at least is still interesting. Seeing these guys win races, seeing Oscar and Lando fight it out for a title. I think that's made the season a lot more interesting. If this was another year of Max dominance, we'd be giving him a lot of credit, which he
Mhm.
deserved, but it wouldn't be quite as entertaining from a fan perspective. So, yeah, I think it's a little unfortunate that McLaren has such a wide gap, but at least it's a new team, and at least there's a lot of action behind them.
Yeah, yeah, that's for sure. Getting to that Hadjar podium, I think it was one of the better performances we've seen. Um, in a little while, just because I feel like he was doing it on pace like the entire race, and that qualifying too, obviously qualifying P4. He gets the free spot because of the Lando drop, but if that's not the case, he qualifies P4 and he holds off the Ferraris, the Mercedes, and all those really strong guys behind him the whole race. Because of the Lando drop, he gets the podium, but even if not, it still would have been an incredibly impressive drive. And he was under, pretty constant threat, I felt like, throughout the whole race with the Ferraris, and either the Ferraris or the Mercedes, right there, challenging him. Um, and Lawson, I feel like he had some pace, but he had other issues that would have prevented him from being up there as well. So both of the Racing Bulls had pace this weekend, but that Hadjar, and it's great because too, I feel like he started the season really hot. Obviously the embarrassing first, not even first lap spin, um the grid lap, getting to the grid, spins out in the rain in Australia. But then after that, he was great. Felt like the summer's kind of slumped a little bit. Still been good. But then he comes back after summer break here and puts in this podium performance that I thought was, incredibly impressive. And for a rookie to do that too, I think it just really speaks volumes to the driver that he is. Um, and really probably the most, I feel like, slept on driver coming into the season of that rookie class, which was so good, of Bortoleto, um, Antonelli, Behrman, all of those guys coming in that we all had very high expectations for. I at least didn't have as much for Hadjar, but the way he's drove this year has really um, pushed those expectations forward to where next year I don't know if he wants it. I don't know what they're going to do with the second Red Bull seat, but I feel like he's definitely um, at least threatening to take that spot now for next year if that's something that is available to him. And I don't want to say something that he wants to do because it's Red Bull. You're going to take the seat, but with how the second seat's gone recently, um, I'm just not sure. In the back of your mind, you probably have some doubts there. But obviously, if he's offered it, he's going to take it.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of headlines recently about whether or not he actually wants the seat. I think, regardless, this guy has had an incredible rookie season. I know, like you mentioned, a lot of ups and downs. that's normal for a rookie, of course. But to rebound, if he's had 5 races in a row here where he's missed the points, hadn't been in the points since Spain, and to come back not just in the points but on the podium, just so impressive. It's recovering from that Australian moment to have a nice start to the year, and then recovering from that rough stretch to put it on the podium. I think it just shows a lot of fortitude from him. And he didn't. He was. I was kind of in the same boat with him as you. That I know he was very good in F2, but just he didn't have the on the paper credentials of someone like Bortoleto, and he wasn't being talked about the same way like an Antonelli was, like a wonder kid. Even Behrman, we'd seen a few races in F1, seen his talent. Hadjar was someone new and kind of really has just jumped off the page this year, and been, even if he's had his ups and downs, it's been a really great rookie season. So I'm incredibly impressed by him. I think this podium was, you could say, I'm sure there are some people out there that will say it's lucky or undeserved, but at the end of the day, he was excellent all weekend. Excellent in qualifying, excellent to hold off Leclerc and Russell. And to me, there's nothing about this that's undeserving. Even if he would have finished in fourth, it would have been one of the best performances of the year. So a lot of props to Isack, and very glad to have him in F1. He's been very exciting to watch this year.
That's the other. I mean, I don't know how you would. The only luck that I would say there that's possible is the Lando mechanical failure boosting him up to third. But the way he drove was all, I mean, all skill, all pace. So I was really impressed by that. Um, I do think that Hadjar, like you said, I wasn't really expecting him to come up the way he did. And I really am, do you think what happens with that second Red Bull seat? Do you think that they keep Yuki, they go to Hadjar or someone completely different for next year? Because it's just so tough to judge, how Yuki would be doing in the Racing Bulls right now versus, um, just flipping the roles. I don't know how many points Hadjar would have in the Red Bull. Like it's such a hard thing to judge, and with a completely new car next year too, that's thrown into it. Um, I don't know what they do with that second Red Bull seat moving forward, because it feels like they have a lot of guys that seem like they're good enough for it, a lot of young guys that seem like they're good enough for it, but every time someone's been put in that spot, they've not done that well. So um, it's a really tough one to judge, I think.
Yeah, it's pretty much impossible to judge. I mean, historically, you would certainly think they've adopted a next man up strategy. Next young driver come through the Red Bull ecosystem. That's their seat. We've seen it with Gasly and Albon, and the rotating cast this year, Sonoda and Lawson. But I think I think if they're going to keep that with Hadjar, I think really the only reason they wouldn't is just being under new management now. With Mekis instead of Horner, maybe they take a risk somewhere. But I think they clearly see this guy has the talent, and I just don't know how you can keep Yuki Tsunoda. I mean, I'm looking at the standings right now. He's 19th, behind
Mhm.
everyone except the Alpine, or what the not the Alpine drivers, the Colapinto Duhan seat specifically, but he's behind both Saubers, both Haas. Um, it's really been a rough season for him, and we've seen his talent throughout his time in F1. Maybe it's just another guy who will struggle in that Red Bull, and if he gets another chance somewhere, he'll go shine with another team. But yeah, I think that they kind of have to take a chance if they want to keep their spot as a top four team. Again, we don't know what the car is going to look like next year. It could be great. It could be terrible. We really have no idea with the new regulations, and also all the changes that they're making behind the scenes. So, for me personally, I would give Isack the shot. I'm sure he will have his second thoughts about it, but I think at least everyone's seen the talent. And even if he has a rough stint at Red Bull next year, there'll be enough people willing to give him another chance. A driver at his age specifically, he's been in the sport for a lot less time than someone like Yuki has. Yuki, we've seen it for a number of years now. There's a chance that his time is up after this year, whereas Isack, even if he goes and has a rough year, maybe he could have a bounce back, kind of like Liam Lawson is having a little bit right now. and find another spot to land for a couple years.
Yeah, it's hard to judge, like you said, because we have no idea how the car is going to be next year. If I were them, I would probably. I feel like we've been through it so long now, where you have to try and make that car as easy to drive for both drivers as possible, because it's going to be very difficult to get back to the dominant level that they were, where they were so dominant that Red Bull could, essentially just race with Max and win the constructors. Um, I don't see, that happening again. If it does, it's going to be, it's going to take a lot of work to get. I think the best way for them to have constructors success at least is to make that car very easy to drive for both. And with, new regulations, a fresh slate. If I were them, I would be, trying to do that as much as you can. But I also know that you have to take care of Max because he's your guy and he's going to win you, the majority of your races and bring home, more championships. So it's a difficult balance that they've juggled for years now. I think the new regulations give them the opportunity to kind of correct that balance a little bit, but we'll see if we'll see how that goes. History tells us that that balance would stay where it is now, of Max being very dominant and capable in that car and everyone else struggling, but maybe they go a different direction. I think that would be probably best for them.
Yeah, I mean, I think no matter what, Max is probably going to be the dominant guy there. But I think if you're Red Bull and if you're Isaac, I think your two hopes are one, just from Isaac's perspective, a self belief that he can do it better than those other guys can. I'm sure all those guys have that self belief coming in, but I think really the key is having that new car, even if it's maybe not as fast at its peak as some of the recent Red Bull cars are. Maybe it's just easier for both guys to drive, and it can make it a little bit more of a fight. Again, I expect Max to beat really whoever they throw at him. Uh, I think if they can make the necessary steps with the car, I think Isaac can at least make it competitive, or not a total blowout that we've seen. I mean, this season is just so outrageous that it really can't get much worse. Um, and that's not even fully a shot at Yuki or Lawson or anybody else. It's just it really, like, just from a points perspective, the margin can't get any worse. So hopefully only up from here from Red Bull.
Yeah, I would hope so that they're able to make that work, and that they're only on the upward, because Max having the ability to win championships. I mean, I know it gets, it was a little bit tiring going through the, Max domination years, but it's also similar to what we're kind of seeing in IndyCar with Alex Palou. It's like you have to kind of respect that dominance almost to an extent, and just appreciate the greatness that you're seeing. So hopefully Red Bull gets Max the opportunity. I mean, I would love it if it's, a close fight. Um, they don't create the greatest car in the world again. But at least enough to where Max can fight for a championship and, make this thing a 3, 4, 5 way fight for a championship moving forward.
Yeah, or just make it respectable from a constructor's perspective. Make it to where you're not a one car team. I think if the second driver had even half the points that Max did this year, they'd be pretty firmly in second in the team standing. So, yeah, I mean, that's really, I think, the key. If you're Red Bull, not even finding a guy that will challenge Max, just someone that can put in a respectable result and, make it a lot easier to win constructors' titles, or at least to beat your rivals there, teams like Ferrari and Mercedes.
Moving on to the stuff with Ferrari, just kind of a terrible weekend for a whole as a team. Starting though with kind of the Antonelli Leclerc incident, the crash. Obviously Antonelli's fault. Leclerc coming into the pits after Antonelli trying to kind of undercut there. He comes through. tries to make a dive bomb into, I believe, turn three there, and just sends it up the inside as Leclerc's coming out on cold tires. And he, I think he kind of just, loses control a little bit, trying to make that lunge with the banking and everything else there, and ends up, running into the side of Leclerc, spitting him out of the race. Of course, you get the famous, photos and videos of Leclerc just sitting on the hill, on the dune there, watching the rest of the race from the inside of the track, which he had a phone. I don't know if he borrowed that from a marshal or how he somehow got his phone out there. I don't know, but it seemed like he was watching or listening to the race or something, from there, which I thought was funny. I don't know how he must have asked the marshal, like, hey, can I borrow your phone while I sit up here? Um, but yeah, not what Leclerc was wanting, obviously. I think we can all pretty, obviously say it was Antonelli's fault, for the crash. But I do, I like Antonelli trying to go for something there. As a rookie, trying to make a move, be a little bit aggressive. It didn't work out. Um, but I do respect Antonelli for going for that there, and trying to get a good race. Just not the move. I think the move could have worked. It just you know it kind of lost control a little bit there, and it didn't work out for Antonelli or for Leclerc, obviously.
Yeah, it was very unfortunate for Charles, but we got really got a peak aura farming opportunity there for Charles. It was
Yeah.
really something else. I saw a reel. I think it was from Kim Illman, the photographer.
Hmm.
I think he said that Leclerc's photographer happened to be on that hill, like shooting
Yeah.
anyways, and that was the photographer's phone that he watched the rest of the
Oh, okay.
race on.
Okay, that makes sense.
And then he also got all those personalized uh, photos of him
Yeah.
in agony on
Do you
top
think
of the
he
hill, which is,
like the photographer ran over and was like, "Hey, we could get some sick shots here if you're willing. I know you're depressed. You just got crashed out, and your team made a terrible strategy call, but we could get some really sick shots for Instagram if you want."
I think it might have been Leclerc's idea. It just be like, you know what, I'm going to get something out of today. If I can't get a points finish, at least I can get some photos that'll be
Get
sent around the world and made into memes.
get a sick picture to hang on my wall back at home.
Yeah, exactly. To commemorate my DNFs. Yeah, it's yeah. I mean, it's really from a racing perspective, it really stinks. Just um, both Ferrari DNFs. Frankly, I think you're right, Antonelli. This is just a little example of a rookie mistake. Uh, that term, I guess, was being debated whether or not it was a rookie mistake or whatever. But it was. I mean, it's just 18-year-old seeing an opportunity and going for it. And um, like you said, Ferrari kind of messed up the strategy in the first place to even put him in that position. I know they already kind of got hosed with the Hamilton crash and the strategy there for Leclerc. So it just really was one of those days where the team made mistakes, the drivers made mistakes. Um, everyone involved. I guess maybe Leclerc himself. He couldn't really do anything about the crash, but almost everyone involved with Ferrari just kind of had a disaster day, which isn't every race, but we've seen it plenty of times from them now. Unfortunately, just uh, you know, not his fault, and that there's a world where Antonelli doesn't run into Leclerc, and we're not even talking about Ferrari really making a massive mistake there. It just it was a small mistake that kind of turned into a big mistake. And, wasn't really their fault, but here we are with a double DNF and more questions going into Monza now, their biggest race of the year.
Yeah, well, it seemed like it was Leclerc was more upset with Ferrari there than with Antonelli, to be honest. More upset with his own team than anything else, putting him in that position, where I don't think he had to pit there, and cover off Antonelli. I don't think he thought that either. I think it seemed a little late in the race, so it seemed like they would have been fine to ride it out. Antonelli would have had to go through a few guys before he got to Leclerc, anyways. I think. So to me, obviously Antonelli crashes him out of the race, and that's ultimately going to cost you the most points, but more than the team making a strategy mistake, which I think they ultimately did in the end. Of course, that's nothing new for Ferrari, and Leclerc probably knows that, but um, I do think he seemed a little bit more upset with his own team than Antonelli, which I thought was a little bit interesting there. Coming out of that crash.
Well, I think too, maybe I'm giving too much, not too much credit, but like too much thought into this, and maybe it's just a really heat of the moment thing. But I think maybe part of it too is a guy like Antonelli. That's just a mistake that a young guy's going to
Yeah,
make. It's
yeah,
not a malicious thing. There's no bad blood there. You compare that to the Lost in Science incident that we'll get to in a bit, and Sainz's sort of reaction there. I think part of that was just because, the reputation that Liam Lawson has as a driver is someone that's aggressive and kind of willing to throw caution to the wind and willing to get in these tussles with other guys. Antonelli, we all know, is not that kind of driver. And, Charles probably, again, maybe I'm reading too much into it, but probably just realized, that if you're Ferrari, that's something you have to consider that maybe a rookie is going to try a move like that and make a bad mistake there, trying to make a pass and crash you out of the race. So I think that's, maybe it has something to do with uh, the other drivers in the incident and also just, just continued frustrations with his team because this happened time and time again, not just this year, but through his entire Ferrari career.
yeah. I think that pretty much nails it. I don't think he is. Um, like you said, I think he's probably pretty, knowing that Antonelli, like when he saw that it was Antonelli, he was probably like, oh, okay, that makes a little bit more sense than if, say, that was George who tried to send it up there. Um, Rookies are going to make those kind of mistakes, and it's not like Leclerc's fighting for a championship or anything like that. So I think that's part of it as well as, understanding that that's kind of the situation that they're in. Um,
Well,
is
and he also as well, like I don't know if this specific incident is on the docket. I don't think it is, but that pass that Leclerc made on Russell earlier in the race that was
Yep.
extremely aggressive. That
Yes.
like one
Yeah.
of the most aggressive F1 passes I've ever seen. It's kind of tough to get really upset at someone for being aggressive after you make a pass like that, where you're on the gravel and it's like a NASCAR style pass almost playing bumper cars with
Yeah.
Russell there. So yeah, maybe that's just him recognizing, he was a little over aggressive too, and just wrong place, wrong time.
Yeah, that's fair. That move was pretty insane when uh the the Leclerc Russell one. I was not expecting him to send it there, and essentially go just straight through the gravel. I mean, he kept it on track, but it was as close as off track as you could get. And yeah, that is a good point. He was being a little bit aggressive all day, so I think a lot of guys at this point in the season are just frustrated with how it's gone, and you're going to get some aggression and some guys trying to prove some things throughout the race. So he's probably understanding of that as well. And with the Hamilton crash, same corner, um, Hamilton by himself. Just getting onto the paint there right when it started to rain a little bit. I don't know if it was the rain ultimately and that slick paint that made him kind of lose control a little bit and get into the barrier there. He was so close to saving that, just losing a couple seconds and keeping on going in the race. Um, but clips that barrier a little bit and ends his day early. It's continued. I don't even know what to say at this point for Hamilton and Ferrari. This experiment has gone. I don't want to say as poorly as it could have so far, but it has not been a great relationship in my opinion. We've seen um, Hamilton pretty upset with race engineers and strategy all throughout the season. We've seen some pretty uncharacteristic Hamilton mistakes. You know, his Spa qualifying, I think he made a couple big mistakes there. Um, this one this week, you know, just things you wouldn't expect Lewis to do. I'm not sure if that's more due to age or him, you know, just struggling to get, you know, in tune with this car. Really, this entire regulation set Lewis has struggled in, to be honest. So um, maybe it's more of that than anything else. But it's just continued to go from bad to worse for Lewis, and really for, I mean, this weekend Ferrari as a whole. That, you know, those two crashes just kind of put the icing on the cake there for a really bad weekend.
Yeah, I mean, for all we can say about how Zandvoort isn't the most exciting track on the calendar, it's certainly a very easy track to have things go haywire and have some incidents happen. And it's kind of what happens to Lewis here. Just gets up a little high and kind of loses it and ends up in the wall. And maybe if he hits a little differently, it's just kind of tips the wall and it loses a couple seconds and goes on with his day. But just loses the front wheel there, and that's the end of his race. I think, yeah, like you said, there's not really much more um, it, to add on as far as like it's just another disaster day for him and for the team. And um, I don't know if it's delusional or not at this point to still think he's going to fight through it. I mean, he's a seven-time champ. He's one of the best ever. But it's almost like a um, unstoppable force versus immovable object here, with all of his talent and success as a driver versus what Ferrari's done as a team for the last 10, 20 years. I mean, it's I just don't know. Maybe next year with the new car, maybe things will get better. Um, this year it just kind of feels like a wash. I'm sure he'll be looking to try and squeeze his way onto a podium or something before the end of the year. I don't think that's out of the question by any means. They could certainly be. There's a lot of races where they're the second best car, and then all he has to do is beat Charles, really. But it's just been a season of disappointment, and this weekend just tacks onto that.
Yeah, it's just really hard, like, for to understand what's going on. And I think a lot of it has to do with, it's just felt like the last, especially two, but even beyond that, but really the last two seasons of his career so far have just been kind of just a wash, just waiting to get to the next year. I mean, last year at Mercedes, he knows it's his last year there. And he knows that car, you know, it had its moments. He won a couple races, but it was not championship caliber car. And then this season, you know, I think he had really high hopes coming in. Pretty early on, I think he knew, and the team knew that it also wasn't a championship caliber car. Because of how good McLaren was as well, being part of it. But there's other issues there as well. Um, but so it's felt like he's just been, at least by the halfway point of both these seasons, just waiting for the season to be over and getting to the next one. Um, and especially with this one, I think he might be fighting harder to try and understand what's going on. Um, and I'm sure he is still, you know, putting in a lot of work. But if the regulations were the same next year, but they're not, so you know, my guess would be, once again, he's waiting for the next year, looking towards 2026 with the new regulations, as you know, maybe his chance to get back up front, you know, with Ferrari and the team. It's a shame though that I felt like we've kind of wasted 2 years of his career here right at the end. Where, I mean, he probably still has a few years left. I'm not sure how long he'll be here, you know, in F1, but um, it's like you're still, I feel like he's still, you know, got the talent. You see it at times. It's not like he's washed or faded or anything. Um, I just think he's looking for a certain set of circumstances, and he has not gotten that the last year or two.
Yeah, I mean, he's still one of the best to ever do it, and we've seen other older drivers, guys like Alonso still get the most out of the car. So I just think it's just a bad situation, um, bad season for everyone involved, and I know he's going to put it all into 26 because that's probably his last chance in F1 to win races or even win a championship potentially. So I don't doubt that the effort's going to be there for next year from him and from the team, and that drive to succeed. I just think this year, that there's really no clawing back unless there's some McLaren DNFs and maybe right track, maybe get lucky, but for a sustained multi-race kind of thing, there's kind of no way back this year. So just to try and make the most out of they can out of this year. Behind the scenes, you got to allocate all the resources to next year, which I'm sure they are at this point.
Yeah, I would assume they're putting everything into 26, both Hamilton and the team. And they're going to Monza this week. There always seems to be some little bit of magic there, at least the last few years for Ferrari. Hamilton, it's going to be his debut. Um, I know they raced at Imola, which is Italy, earlier this year, but Monza, I think just means a little bit more to the Italian fans. So it'd be his, really true debut in front of the big Ferrari crowds there. And I think this weekend will, be very telling just in terms of, moving forward. I don't think they're expecting to, make a big jump this year, but just, the fight that team has moving forward, I think you should see that on display this weekend, if it's going to be any weekend the rest of the year. Um, moving to the loss and signs thing, which you speak on or you touched on a little bit earlier. Um, I don't know how, to me, Signs gets that 10-second penalty. I don't know how that penalty is on Signs. Um, it was one of those ones where they're battling very hard. Um, Kind of ruined both of their races, to be honest. From there, neither one, both were in a position to score good points for their teams. Neither one it ends up getting any points. Um, it was just one of those, to me, just hard racing incidents. I think probably, in my opinion, a little bit more of the blame runs on Lawson, but I don't know how Signs comes out of there with a 10-second penalty.
Yeah, I think just another one we're kind of in the same boat on. I think the penalty was certainly harsh, but I also disagree with it, Carlos, about it being solely on Liam Lawson. I think this one was a racing incident, really, with some blame on both drivers. You know, Sainz could have, there could have been some more space left, but there also, it was also a very aggressive move as well. And we know about Lawson's history here, and Sainz clearly does as well. So I just think that the penalty was really terrible. I mean, there's really no excuse for the penalty there. It's just it seemed like a simple racing incident. Those can happen after lap one. We usually think of
Hmm.
those as lap one or maybe lap two incidents. But sometimes, both guys just go into a corner hard and, unfortunately, sometimes only one of them comes out or none of them do. And that's just the way it is. This wasn't an Antonelli Leclerc situation where one guy was clearly at fault. I think both guys could have played their roles a little bit differently, and it could have been a little less aggressive. But it is what it is, and unfortunately, cost both of them. Both of them could have had really nice point scoring races for their team, but luckily their teammates picked up the slack on both ends.
Yeah, that's a good point, team wise. But I agree. I just the 10-second thing is what gets me a little tripped up. 10 seconds seems like quite a large number. In terms of a penalty for an incident like that. Um, as we I compare penalties, it's always hard to do that, but like the Verstappen Russell thing earlier this year was what, a 10-second penalty, right? Between when Verstappen intentionally goes into the side of Russell. Like if we've touched on this before with other 10-second penalties this year after that incident, but it's like, if that's a 10-second penalty, this cannot be a 10-second penalty. Either the other one has to be much larger or this one has to be, a lot less. But that's a whole, separate conversation about the penalty system that I think probably needs to be addressed at some point.
Yeah, you're 100% right. There's no reason. I mean, with this incident, it's just Sainz trying to be a little bit aggressive on the outside and Lawson being a little aggressive, shutting the door. But neither of them did anything that egregious, really, to get any kind of penalty, in my opinion. But if you're going to give them 10 seconds, whoever you find at fault, then penalties like that max one should have been a 20, 30 seconds,
Yeah.
even a DQ or something. If you're going to compare it to something like that, it's just kind of outrageous that
Yeah.
uh, the FIA continues to do this, where sort of any kind of racing incident is 5 or 10 seconds, and we're just kind of settled at that. I think there needs to be a little more variety and a little more focus on, you know, especially an incident like that. Was it intentional? Was it not? I know most incidents I would say aren't intentional, and it's just someone gets a little over aggressive or makes a mistake. But like that one specifically, you're comparing it to with Max. I mean that it should be a massive difference, and right now I guess it is none, according to the FIA and their race penalties.
Yeah, that's a large conversation that I think probably, we'll have at some point. But um yeah, the penalty system, like you said, continues to be kind of a bit of a joke at this point. Let's move to our personal podiums here. I think that there were a lot of ways that you could go for this week, a lot of pretty good performances. I think we're probably both gonna have the same guy in number one, though. That's Isack Hadjar. uh, we touched on him earlier, but his first podium as a rookie, um, and also he did it on pure pace. We said little tiny sprinkle of luck with the Lando incident. He gets a free position there, but that drive was all pace. It's not like he lucked into it with a crazy strategy call or a super wet race where people are just slipping and sliding off the track everywhere, and he manages to keep it on. This was a legit drive in my opinion. So I gotta go Hadjar number one. I assume he is your number one as well, but maybe you got someone else there.
No, I have Isaac at number one as well. I mean, like we mentioned earlier, even if the Lando incident hadn't happened, I think I would still have him at number one, even if he finished fourth instead of third. I think it's just such a phenomenal top to bottom performance throughout the course of the weekend. A lot of times we give a lot of credit to guys who have a poor qualifying and then rebound very well, and a lot of that is just and due. But I think when you combine that incredible qualifying performance with incredible race performances, it's one of the best overall performances of the year.
Yeah, that's perfectly said. In second, I have Alex Albon. He disappointed after quali, not exactly where he wanted to be. Sainz put in a great performance for Williams, but kind of things switch up in the race, like we mentioned with the Sainz incident. And then Albon has a heck of a race. Finishes P5 after not making Q3 there. Gains a lot of spots and it just looks really good, really comfortable when Williams are at circuits where that car is clicking. Albon is firing on all cylinders this year. And this was another great drive from him. So I got him second on my personal podium.
Yeah, so I switched it up a little bit. I've gone with Oscar Piastri for second on my podium here. I know that it's kind of tough to judge with how dominant this McLaren is, but to come in and again, even if Lando finished second, was still exactly what he needed this weekend. That performance. I did look it up. I mentioned earlier that it was McLaren's first Grand Slam in decades. It's their first since Mika Hakkinen in Monaco in 1998. So the first
Yeah.
time taking pole and winning the race, fastest lap, leading every lap. I mean, that's just a phenomenal top to bottom performance, exactly when he needed it. One of the most important races of his career, and he came in and really kind of shut the door on Lando even a little more than he expected or anyone else expected. Um, but at least for the moment, really set a dominating position in this championship, and I just think he deserves a spot on that personal podium just for a great top to bottom performance.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I actually went without him on my personal podium at all. I thought about putting him. Obviously, it was a great drive, but I feel like we had a lot of guys who, um, put in really good performances that we don't always see up here. So I thought I'd, give them a little bit of love here. Could have been Piastri in this third spot. Could have been, could have been Behrman. Could have been Alonso. I went with Lance Stroll. Multiple crashes on the weekend, one in practice, one in qualifying, and then he comes all the way from the back to finish P7. A great drive from him. Um, Felt like Aston had him on a good strategy as well. Of course, that helps. Um, but it's like those few weekends a year where Stroll decides to show up and act like an actual Formula One driver. This was one of those weekends, and when he does, he looks really good. So I wish we saw more of that more often from him. But in the end, this weekend he did look really really good. So I got to put him third. A heck of a drive there for the Aston Martin driver.
Yeah, that's a great shout, and I think you make a great point. There's a lot of guys that deserve it this weekend, so I don't think there's a perfect three. Um, for my third, I've gone with Ollie Behrman. It was a real toss up for me between Behrman and Albon. Both really had fantastic drives. Both, frankly, had a little bit of luck just with the timing of safety cars and also with Albon finishing ahead of Sainz probably in part due to Sainz's incident with Lawson and everything. Um, but at the end of the day, they were both phenomenal performances. I just gone with Behrman just over Lawson here, just given they started all the way from the pit lane to come all the way and have his best performance in F1, finish in sixth place, and and doing a Haas too, which like we mentioned earlier, not a huge gap between any of these midfield or really level teams this year. But they have been behind Williams for a majority of the races this year and been a slightly worse car. So just to make that big of a leap all the way from the pit lane to P6 is really a phenomenal performance. And that's another guy that I think too has had quite the up and down year. Has had a few races at a time where he's kind of been non-existent, and then he comes back and has a performance like this and kind of reminds you of what he's capable of and why he's got this seat in F1. I know he had that stretch of 11ths and a stretch of being just outside the points, and I think this was a big weekend for him and for his momentum and it's just a weekend of the year, so got to give some credit where credit is due there.
Yeah, I like that spot as well. I think this is probably the biggest disparity we've had in a personal podium. So shows how many guys were putting in great drives this weekend. Um, yeah, it's always good to see, a little bit of disparity there and um, a lot of guys having, really solid drives. Moving on to, an area where people might not have had really solid drives. Stinker of the week. For me, it was Ferrari. Not even really an organizational like level stinker of the week. Just, not like they made horrendous calls, not like they had just zero pace, but when you have a double DNF, that's always tough. And Lewis crashing by himself, the Leclerc thing, obviously, from a macro view, not his fault. But if you get into the or not Ferrari's fault per se, but if you get into the nitty gritty details of it, putting him in that position with that strategy call, you could say might have cost them. So I just think, overall it has to be Ferrari. You could make the case for some other guys or some other teams, but to me, just double DNF in the way that they did. I'm going with Ferrari here for stinker of the week.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned how different our podiums were because we're exactly the same here. I put down Ferrari as well, just with double DNF disaster weekend. Like I mentioned earlier, not 100% their fault, but certainly, with the exception of maybe Leclerc, almost everybody else there can share some blame. It was just a real disaster all around. I did consider some other, our guy Kimmy again, just
Yeah.
for punting Charles, and then also Alpine for having such a topsy turvy race and they still didn't manage to score a point. Um, Not ideal. Don't want to get you too riled up on that, but a Ferrari just time and time again letting us down, and especially going into Monza here. Other than doing it at Monza, this is one of the worst times of year to do it. Just the vibes are going to be pretty low there this week on what should have been one of the most exciting Monza weekends in a while. So hopefully they can turn it around and get one of those guys on the podium. Even if they're a distant third, I think it would mean a lot and be a big boost to the end of their season and to morale to even get one guy on the podium in Monza this week.
I had all summer break to forget about the Alpine woes, and then you got to bring it right back up. No, we'll save some of that for another day when I'm sure they'll have another terrible performance this year. And I mean, we're still not sure about that second seat. They haven't said anything that I've seen about. I assume it's just going to be Colapinto the rest of the way, but is he still on a per race deal? I don't know. I'll leave my Alpine rant for another day. But they're
I
they're
mean, Colapinto finished 11th this week. That's not bad. That's
that
progress.
might be seat saving. That might be a seat saving drive right there. P11. My goodness, what a
Two
performance!
race two race contract now coming up.
You get to stay on a little bit longer, Franco. Um, yeah, another guy who I mean could have gone there. Obviously, you think Lando maybe, but it wasn't his fault. So I was thinking heavily about that just for championship ramifications. But you can't. What am I gonna say? Stinker of the week is Lando's engine. Maybe that could be it. They said also it's like a chassis problem, so I'm not really sure what happened. Seemed like it would have been an engine problem with the smoke, but I'm not sure what happened there. But Lando's car is also honorable mention stinker of the week.
Yeah, that's kind of what I had in mind too. That it's basically the toughest beat of the week. Obviously, is Lando's DNF and what happened there, but you really can't blame anyone. You definitely can't blame Lando. I don't know if you blame the mechanics or whatnot, but frankly, it's just a lot easier to say Ferrari, especially
Yeah,
because McLaren still won the race. Their other
yeah.
driver did. So if it was a double DNF, then that would be another conversation. But yeah, it's definitely the toughest beat of the week, but kind of hard to pick them over Ferrari for the award.
Well, if it is an engine, we have to say Mercedes because Mercedes are the engine builders for McLaren. So maybe it's Mercedes. I don't know. No, but and I still don't have any clarification on if it was the engine or if it was a chassis. I mean, they say chassis, so I guess that's what it is. But it didn't seem like that from on the broadcast, at least. Um, Moving on to our last thing here, and I've decided, I've declared, we're Americans. We are gonna both be Cadillac fans next year, so I've declared this is the main Cadillac podcast is what we're gonna be. So we will be keeping everyone in tune with both of our new favorite team. Obviously, Haas has been here. We get that, but I don't know if Haas really has resonated with the whole American team thing as much as they've wanted to. I think Cadillac will a little bit more. Um, so this will be the main Cadillac podcast channel. So keep your eyes out there. But we do have a lot of, the big Cadillac announcement from the past week. Valtteri Bottas and Sergio Perez joining the team as the drivers. And we also now, just breaking today, Colton Herta joining as the test driver for Cadillac F1 team next year, leaving IndyCar completely. Um, so that's big news as well. But just start with the Bottas and Perez stuff here. What's your take on that signing? Do you think they're two good drivers for Cadillac? Would you have gone another direction? What are your thoughts for the initial driver signing for Cadillac?
Yeah, I mean, briefly, just your comments on them being an American team. They're really a General Motors team. It doesn't get much more American than that. I know
Yeah,
Haas is American, but just not being a a car manufacturer really in the same way, kind of, it just doesn't feel the same.
yeah,
General Motors is as American as it gets, and
yeah,
Cadillac is right along with that. Um, as far as the drivers go, I mean, I think this is a great move for a new team like Cadillac. You want as much expertise as possible when you're collecting data and improving the car. And, with these, I think out of all the guys that you realistically could have gotten, you're not going to get an Alonso or Hamilton, someone like that. I think out of everyone that was on the table, these two are probably the most capable of providing that for your team and building your car. And, and they're both very capable drivers too. And maybe in a couple years, you take that data and improve the car, and then maybe you go find a young hotshot driver. Maybe Herta's ready by then. Maybe you go get somebody else that comes through the ranks. But for now, I think this is perfect. I know they wanted an American, but you do have the American reserve driver, and you also have, both these guys. Botas is very openly embraced. Spending time in America and just the American way of life, I guess. And Checo is obviously Mexican, but has a massive fan base in the U.S. because of it, especially places that they race in the U.S.
hmm
Miami, Austin, Las Vegas. So I think that kind of became a non-factor. Or at least not as big of a factor as we thought maybe
yeah,
when picking these drivers. I just think it was kind of a slam dunk. There's lots of other promising young guys out there, but there's nobody that was a sure thing like these two guys. And I think as long as they can make the car competitive, and I just mean like, low midfield competitive, not podiums and race winning, just, if it's the kind of car you can occasionally put in the points, I think that they're going to get the most out of it next year. So, um, that's kind of my hopes for year one for them, is to just, establish, being competitive with the rest of the grid. And I think those two guys are your best choice to deliver on that.
yeah. I agree. I think at base, starting first year, getting two guys with that much experience, I think it is really even more helpful than I think a lot of people would think right off the bat. You're getting a team that's starting from scratch. It's not a new team like Aston Martin coming in the way that they did, or how Audi's going to come in. It's literally a completely new team from scratch. And I think Botas and Perez, both with their on track experience, but also just knowing how an F1 team is supposed to operate. They've both been in incredible situations. Botas with the Mercedes dominance, Perez with the Red Bull dominance. They've seen how those things function and how those things work. Um, I think bringing that in is going to be is going to bring worlds of help. Um, and then on track as well, they obviously have a lot of experience. We've seen great drives from both of them throughout their careers. They're both kind of second seat merchants. So it's going to be a little bit interesting to see um, if Cadillac is very level on their two seats. If one guy takes the reins and is goes from second seat to first seat, it'll be interesting to see how that works. Um, and then like you said, I was a little bit surprised that they didn't go with an American driver, but if you look at the American drivers right now that are obviously, I mean, you have good drivers in the likes of like Kyle Larson or Joseph Newgarden, or like those those types of guys. Um, they're not gonna want to do F1. I don't think that they're that's in their mind. Um, Guys that would Herta obviously. Um, you got Jack Crawford in F2. I know Zilich is a NASCAR now, so there's that whole thing. But he has said, he wouldn't be close to the idea of F1 in the future. That's kind of what he grew up on. Um, there's talent there, but I don't think they're talent that is ready to compete right away in F1. On top of that, the super license situation is a nightmare for a lot of the American guys. So I just don't see like how that would have worked out. I know it's what they wanted. That's probably how they're going with the signing Hurt as a test driver, hoping that he assumes that role in a year or a couple years time. But as of right now, I don't think there was anybody that you could get that would be right for that spot. So, as much as I would have liked to have seen it, and a lot of people would have liked to, probably at Cadillac as well, I just don't think it was in the cards at the moment. Um, and the Botas and Perez picks are both great picks, and like you mentioned, they both have American, fans and American ties as well. So you're not getting, I mean, in the end, it doesn't really matter. But I know as an American brand, like I'm sure you want that. I'm sure all of these brands want guys who are from their nationality deep down. Um, but in the end, you're just looking for guys who are going to be fast and are going to compete and be right for your team. Um, and that's what I think you're getting with Botas and Perez here to start with Cadillac.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, the marketing, of course, is important, but also when you're backed by brands like General Motors and Cadillac, you have the money. It's
Yeah.
not some of these other teams like Williams when they were kind of down and out, and Haas is another team like that. Like, they might be struggling a little bit more for the money, and they might need those paid drivers or that level of sponsor support. Really, GM and Cadillac shouldn't need that. They should just be looking for the best guys behind the wheel, and if they have any marketing potential, that's great, a great bonus. But these two guys, I think, deliver on that on both regards. I think that they're going to be great for the team, and um, like you mentioned, there's a lot of promising young guys out there that might be ready in a year, 2 years, however long it is. We'll see how Perez adjusts being back in a team that's not Red Bull, and see how Botas comes back after a little time off. But I think they'll both jump right in and do a solid job and get close to the best out of that car that they're going to get.
Yeah, I think, from two drivers that were available that you could get, I don't think it gets any better. A lot of people probably wanted Ricardo. He seems to be, completely done with an F1 thing. I'd still love to see him do one-offs in other motorsports. I'm not sure if that's on the table for him. But he seems to be enjoying retirement from F1, so that didn't really ever seem like an actual option. And then I've never been the biggest Herta guy. I still think I think that there's just been times where I would have liked to seen more of him in IndyCar. Um, but I do think getting him in the organization early is a really good thing. And then if you're trying to build up that American talent, you kind of have to start there just because of the situation that everybody else is in um, at the moment. So I do think that that's a good pickup in the end. Um, and I see the path that they're probably going down where Herta, if he's ready in a year, 2 or 3 years time, takes that spot over for whoever is done the worst or is ready to retire of the Perez and Botas camp. Um, so I see the path that Cadillac is headed down, and I do think that it is a solid path. And like you said, they have the money to spend on probably who they want and not who they need, as to bring in sponsorship and all that. So not to say Botas and Perez, obviously Perez brings a ton of sponsorship to any team, but I don't think that they have to have that. So I think they're in a good position to look for guys that they want, not that they need.
Yeah, exactly. I agree with you there, and I think that they really got the guys that they need. Like we said, I don't think you're going to do much better than that. I'd love to see. I'm hoping for Danny Rick one off in something like NASCAR.
Mm-hmm.
Project 91 road course kind of thing would be fantastic. But Yeah, I just don't see him back in F1, and there's nobody else out there with the kind of established record that these two guys have that you're realistically going to get at this point.
Yeah, I agree. I think overall I give the signings probably like a B plus. Just because, they're not huge names, but you were never gonna get huge talent just in this pool anyways, of guys that were available and guys that wanted to, join an upstart team. But I do think that it is a good signing nonetheless. So yeah, I think that's everything we have from this week. We'll be back next week to break down Monza. Should be a really exciting race. Obviously, all one of the ones that I look forward to the most every year. Always a lot of passion there. Being there last year was awesome. I already got memories on my phone from last year and missing, not being there this year. But I'll be back someday because that was a great experience. Obviously Leclerc winning was a huge plus to that experience. Um, but yeah, it's always one of the best. I love the track, so should be really exciting. And seeing Lando try and fight back in this championship, seeing a lot of other things. Ferrari put on a great performance for their own team or their home crowd. Just a lot to go on this weekend, so should be super exciting.
Yeah, I'm definitely glad you went last year. Someone that wanted to see Leclerc win because it might be a little harder this year, but
Yeah.
I'm certainly
Well, I didn't
certainly
think he'd win
excited.
last year either. So,
That's a good point. Yeah, that's a good point. No, but like
but
you
I don't
mentioned,
think
a
this
big
year is gonna be that.
yeah, like you mentioned, the story is going to be a potential bounce back weekend for Lando. We'll see if he can do it. See if he can kind of um, inch his way back towards that title race. And by the same token, we'll see if Piastri can shut the door even more. So, still excited, still a long way to go in the season, and can't wait for the rest of it.
Yeah, I don't want to say this is a must win for Lando next week or this week, but I mean it's pretty close to it just because you can't, dig this hole too much deeper. At the very least he has to finish one position behind of Oscar wherever that is, but whether it's 1, 2, 2, 3, whatever it is, but he really does need to win this week in my opinion.
Yeah, I was going to say finish one position ahead of Oscar, even if it's 2-3 or something. I mean,
Yeah.
I'd it's not over if they finish 1-2 with Oscar in first, but that's just an even bigger hole to dig and one less race to do it. So, his back's really against the wall, but like we mentioned, it's not over by any stretch. So,
Yep. Well, that's everything for this week. Super exciting week coming up ahead. Thank you guys for listening, and we'll see you next time.
yep. See you soon.